We had five very rich presentations, and they covered a fairly wide ground. We have some 15 minutes, so if there are any questions, please identify yourself and make it very brief and make it a question. Ambassador Mohan Kumar.
Thank you, sir. I'll be very brief. I was very struck by what Ambassador Sotrak said, and I think it provokes a lot of discussion, and it should, among people who are well-meaning and who want to take this relationship forward. My question to him is that if we take his assessment that ASEAN is not convinced about India's ability to be a counterweight to China, I wish to ask him, even if this is a hypothetical question, as to what is the one thing that India should do that will convince him. There is no way we can bridge the asymmetry in economics. So I don't want him to say that. That's not going to take us anywhere. But other than that, is there anything, that's something that needs to be taken seriously, is there anything that India can do that will make him change his mind? Secondly, on implementation, I agree. I mean, I think frankly, we have a dismal record, if we can speak frankly among ourselves. So that's something that India has to do. But more importantly, he also said, somewhat provocatively, that India needs to prove that ASEAN is central to its scheme of things. That is a proposition that I find difficult to understand. I think Ambassador Amar Sinha made it very clear that whatever we have on the west of our country, that's a different issue. But again, my question to him is there anything that he thinks that India should do that will convince ASEAN? What we have to understand, Chair, is that this is a view that I'm assuming that it is widespread, and we need to tackle this rather than keep saying this relationship has gone from strength to strength, which it has. But listening to this session, and I agree with you, I think it's been very rich. It seems to me that we have reached a plateau, and it's becoming difficult to take it to the next level, which is what this conference should be addressing. And to me, that is the central challenge of the India-ASEAN relationship. But thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Thank you for your question. When I said that India have not been seen in the wider world, not only in ASEAN, in Southeast Asia, as a counterweight to China, is the fact that, for example, you take the issues on the new term that even President Trump used, the Indo-Pacific, and Indonesia is probably a very strong proponent to support. That the term Indo-Pacific implies that India have to be there, must be there, should be there. But frankly speaking, I go around to many conferences in the security realm, political security realm. I observe that somehow India is still reluctant to take this and push this agenda and project itself as indeed a major contributor. Another thing that I said in my statement is that there is a need that India should be considered as parts and parcel to any emerging political security mechanism, a viable one. And you look at the South China Sea. India said India is adhered to rule-based, norm-based, and all these things. But you look at the PCA, the Permanent Arbitration Court. Unless I'm somewhere, I don't see a clear stance from India which say that international rule-based is a decisive with regard to China historical claim. That's one. And you look at you also can see something that you said correctly, you cannot compare when you address China. China just when they do things, they do it very grand with money behind it. And India is a little bit lacking behind that. And that's why I said there's so much things that India, ASEAN declared that they will do together, and you assess the plan of action, you see in there are a shortage of delivery. So I hope the new plan will not do. So counterweight, I do not believe that India is very much forward going, and I don't understand that myself either as to why India is still a bit hesitant on that aspect.
Thank you, Chair. Not to monopolize the conversation, has Doklam changed this perception at all, in your view?
What's it?
Doklam, the standoff.
The standoff between India and China?
Well, different report. If you read the Chinese, they said they won. If I read some report in India, so and who is it going to say no? I mean, look, what is the third party? So this is my.
Okay. Professor Shankari Sundaraman, yes.
Can you hear me now? Yes, please. Thank you very much, Chairperson. I have actually 3 small comments and questions related to all the panelists. At the outset, let me first thank all of you for your wonderful presentations. The first observation and question is that when you actually look at the focus on geopolitics itself and the impact that geopolitics has when power transition is actually happening in a region as interesting as the East Asian region, I think one of the things that we've seen in the morning session is that the Indonesian ambassador mentioned the entire role of UNCLOS and the maritime order and the normative maritime order. And this was also highlighted by Admiral Dhawan in his reference to normative order and a rules-based normative and maritime order in East Asia. Now, when you see the dichotomy between the rise of a power and the shift in maritime normative order, then how do you then reconcile these two differences in terms of how do you address and convince a state to continue in the given maritime normative order when that state is pushing itself to deny that kind of a position? That's the first question. The second thing I found very interesting with Ambassador Sotirak's presentation was a very frank, I mean, I must really compliment you on your frank and candid assessment that you made, especially the fact that, initially we had a lack of mutual strategic trust and that we're now, in the last 20 years or so, we're trying to build a kind of a mutual strategic trust. The one thing that I was taken aback was when you said about India's emphasis on the centrality of the ASEAN, in the entire dynamic. If at all, I've been an observer of ASEAN now for about, a decade, at least 2 decades now, and I think if at all India has shown any kind of foreign policy focus, I think it's on the notion that the ASEAN centrality is very, very critical. And what interests me is that, to my mind, I think the centrality question is not so much focused from an outsider's perspective on what India as an outsider looks at centrality, but I think a lot of the centrality debates relate to intra-ASEAN tensions. And in my mind, addressing intra-ASEAN issues would probably give you greater emphasis on centrality as a focus than in looking at how outside countries look at ASEAN as a grouping. So I would be very interested to get your feedbacks on the question of intra-ASEAN tensions and how that would affect the centrality question. One of the interesting comments you currently gave in response to Ambassador Mohan Kumar's question was India not taking a position on the international court arbitration and whether not commenting on it. I think the very fact that India's maritime boundary with Bangladesh has been settled according to UNCLOS sends a very strong signal on where we stand in terms of the normative principles and the impact and the implementation of UNCLOS within our own region. So I would assume that that gives a much stronger message than us having to actually say that we don't support Chinese historicity or claims of historicity to the region. My final question is to Professor Ghoshal, which I was very interested, sir, with your the comment that you made on starting an Asian quadrilateral. One of the things to my mind is that even the quadrilateral as it is currently, as it has been currently conceived, it again focuses on principles of freedom of navigation and the normative order. Now, given that the United States is a primary security provider to the region, how would the Asian Quadrilateral then, either factor in the United States role or not factor in the United States role? Thank you.
Thank you. Would Admiral Dhawan like to answer the first part that I'll ask you, then Professor Ghoshal.
Thank you very much for that question. It is indeed a situation which has to be seen in perspective, because the whole concept of the global commons, where we have 90% of the world's trade transiting by sea, and I made mention that nearly $5 trillion worth of seaborne commerce as well as energy supplies pass through the South China Sea. So we have to have the freedom of navigation. These global economic highways have to run, because the impact of any impediment to these global economic highways is not just on the economies of the region, but on global economies as well. So there is no doubt that freedom of navigation has to be respected. We have to follow the rules of the game, in this case the UNCLOS, and your question is very pertinent, and it's that we all understand that. But what do we do when somebody who understands the rules does not want to actually adhere to them? Here I would like to suggest that rather than have additional organizations formed up to talk, because there's nothing short of discussions, talk, and actual things on the ground, we could take the help of existing organizations, which are organized structures. In the maritime domain, I mentioned one, which is the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, which has 22 member navies. The IORA, incidentally, has 20 members whose navy is also part of IONS, and in recent years there's been some synergy between the IONS and IORA. Some of our ASEAN members are part of the IONS, but there's another organization very similar, which is called the Western Pacific Naval Symposium. Now, when you actually join the two together, then all the players from United States to China and those ASEAN members who are not part of the IONS or part of the WPNS are all covered. I think this provides an ideal setup where we need to have more synergy and more interaction between the IONS and the WPNS to take on specific issues which are of concern. I'm aware that, we have looked at the aspect related to piracy, we've had the aspect related to security issues, we've had a look at humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, because what is being threatened by the aggressive posture of China in the South China Sea is not just the sovereignty issues. There are larger issues even of the offshore oil and minerals, the aspect related to trade. So there has to be discussion to perhaps take away a little focus from what is central and discuss the other issues which impact. We had some of the measures like DOC, the Declaration of Conduct. We had talks about the aspect of having certain rules for unaccounted encounters at sea, the Qs, which was suggested during one of the WPNS meeting. But I would suggest that the navies of the entire Indo-Pacific region, which get combined under IONS and WPNS, actually take this on and discuss this. If nothing else, it should start by having some confidence-building measures, which will put into place some declarations of conduct, some types of confidence-building measures, firstly, so that we do not have adventures out at sea, that it doesn't lead on to some shooting match inadvertently or otherwise. So we need to have the confidence-building measures put in place, because the impact of trade, the impact of the economics, which is actually going to be the key, impacts China as much as it impacts everybody else. Huge amount of China's trade, 80% and above of oil and trade requirement, pass through the Indian Ocean region. That is itself the purpose of why China is looking at other options like the BRICS to secure the aspect of the threat and take care of the Malacca dilemma that it has. So I think the start point is to have a common ground, and existing structures such as the IONS and WPNS provide an avenue where we sit and actually take up some of these issues on the agenda. We are not indicating that we'll get success on the first meeting, but certainly there will be talk, there will be certain confidence building measures, and both sides, navies from both sides, other agencies can be involved to take this on.
Thank you, Chair. Again, on the questions of centrality, ASEAN domestically view centrality as a gatekeeper and agenda setting. It's very important to internal ASEAN. Anything that's put on the summit meeting or something have to clear that process. They like to check everything. And if it's sensitive, critically sensitive, they often don't want to put it on. But the most important for me when we speak about ASEAN centrality, I've used ASEAN centrality as